Welcome to episode 87 of Live with the Maverick. My name is Dominic Lee, founder of Maverick Actuary. We are a content community. Our mission is to maximize the impact and value of quant professionals on a global scale. The goal of this series is to educate our community on the most relevant themes in actuarial science, risk management, and analytics. The theme of today's discussion is Actuaries in Bermuda, and we are very excited to have with us our guest for today's episode, 𝗪𝗪𝗀𝗪𝗔. Wes is a senior actuary at 𝗘𝗽𝗏𝗪𝗀 Management Limited. So welcome, Wes.
Thanks, Dom. Great to be here.
Great to have you. I think this is going to be a lot of fun, and just love to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks. Good afternoon or morning or wherever people are listening from. I'm 𝗪𝗪𝗀𝗪𝗔. I'm a senior actuary at 𝗘𝗽𝗏𝗪𝗀 Management in Bermuda. I am originally from Cape Town in South Africa. So Bermuda is about 5-hour time difference, but more than 24 hours of flight to get here. There's no direct flight, in fact. But yeah, I'm originally from Cape Town, South Africa. My family's still based there. My parents are both tennis coaches. I'm the oldest of 2 brothers. My brother's also actually in Bermuda, so that has been great. Definitely having family here. He's at a life insurer in Bermuda. He's been here for about 2 years now, and myself, I've been here for about 5 years now. So definitely a local in Bermuda terms, I'd say by now. But yeah, I grew up in Cape Town, studied there as well, went to school there. I started my first job there. I worked for a company called 𝗘𝗽𝗏𝗪 Analytics. They are a actuarial software and consulting firm. They now have offices, all over the globe, so they're doing really well, which I'm very happy for them for. And then I worked for them for about 3 to 4 years, and then after that moved to Bermuda. Started off with KPMG Bermuda, and I think that's how me and you met, by the way. We met at a conference.
Risk_World.
Yeah. So that's been great. But yeah, ever since then, I've moved on, and I think since end of 2022, I've been with 𝗘𝗏𝗪𝗀𝗪𝗀. So it's been a journey. But yeah, it's great in Bermuda. Great to be here, and yeah, looking forward to the chat.
I'm still paralyzed, by the way, about the bill, just the general cost of that trip in San Francisco. Wow, it was really quite eye-opening.
Absolutely. I mean, it reminded me of Bermuda, the cost of living there, buying a coffee and it costs like $8. I'm like, I thought I'm going to a cheaper country or cheaper jurisdiction. It's a great conference, and it's great always those type of things to meet people. And I think that's the great thing about the actuarial profession as well. I think every actuarial body, whether it's the UK, South Africa, US, everyone has their conferences and events, and try to get everyone together, try to not talk about academics all the time. But yeah, it's just a great way to get people together.
Yeah, so you said your parents were tennis players. Did you play growing up?
Yeah, I actually played a decent amount.
Nice.
Prior to studying actuarial, I wanted to become a tennis professional. But yeah, that didn't turn out to, it didn't work out. But my brother went pretty far. He played in the States, then started his first job there, and that's how he moved to Bermuda. But yeah, I still play a decent amount of Bermuda, not as much as I'd like to. But yeah, yes, I mean, it's good weather all around here. So play a lot of golf, play a lot of tennis. I might actually go play a couple of holes after this. So yeah, I try to get out as much as I can, but not quite as much as I used to when I was back in school.
Yeah, I'm a big tennis fan, and my best friend's a tennis player. So
Really?
and I was a swimmer, and so I've always been athletic, and so I really, I haven't played in a while, and I'm not, of course I didn't play competitively, but I really enjoy tennis. So lots of stuff, interesting stuff happening now with all these tournaments. So
No, agreed.
yeah, so you are a senior actuary at 𝗘𝗏𝗪𝗀𝗪𝗀 Management, so while you're in an actuarial role, 𝗘𝗏𝗪𝗀𝗪𝗀𝗪 Management, that sounds a bit non-traditional. So how would you describe that role and company?
Yeah, definitely. I think most of the actuaries probably go into stuff like capital and reserving, and most likely reserving. I think probably, especially in the P&C side, most actuaries, I'd say, work in reserving and at more traditional roles. But I think that's one of the great things about Bermuda as well, is the role necessarily in most companies aren't too siloed, whether you're working for a consulting firm or an insurance company or an investment manager, as I do. I think that's a great thing. You work a bit of in underwriting, but in reserving, a bit of everything, and you get all the exposure to a range of different actuarial and non-traditional actuarial fields. But yeah, 𝗙𝗏𝗃𝗪𝗏 Capital, we're an independent investment manager, founded in 2008. Based in Bermuda, we invest in insurance-related products, primarily property catastrophe. But I think there's a lot of funds in Bermuda. They'll invest mostly in property cat, but there are some other funds that do some specialty business, do some other alternative type of investments. Majority of our stuff is we specialize in property cat. And what that really is that's anything to do with or insuring against anything to do with things like hurricanes and earthquakes, et cetera, et cetera. So it's actually a pretty interesting market. And the whole objective that we're trying to achieve is for our investors to construct a portfolio that's, gives them a good risk reward ratio, or has a good risk reward, portfolio construction. But still, one of the key benefits is definitely a low correlation with financial markets, like the bond market crashing or the stock market crashing has a relatively low correlation with, I don't want to say California because I think you live in California, but an earthquake hitting Los Angeles, right? So, and I think that's really the attractive point for investors is as a percentage of their portfolio. I don't know if that's 5 or 10% or whatever that may be, to allocate some towards alternative assets such as reinsurance and property catastrophe. So, but yeah, I do a range of things. I think, again, as I said earlier, there's the actuaries here and also people that are not actuaries work on a range of different things. I'd say in terms of timing, probably 60% of my time is spent on underwriting or technical pricing on the reinsurance side. I also do a decent amount of reserving still. I do a bit on the investor relations side as well. So that's anything from educating new investors or existing investors to answering some of their questions, to preparing the marketing documentation, or just addressing anything technical that people might want to look at, or might want to take a closer look at. So, and then also I do a bit of catastrophe modeling, not necessarily running the models myself, but I did the CEEM, which is Verisk's catastrophe modeling designation. I promised myself after my actuarial studies I will never study again. But once I got to 𝗙𝗏𝗃𝗪𝗏, they asked that I do that, and generally it's not like any of the actuarial exams, fortunately, but it definitely helps you understand a bit more about the models. And as an actuary, I think it's important for everyone to understand. You need to understand the assumptions, the methodologies. That's the fundamentals on what our profession is based on. So yeah, I think that was a good course, and I still get involved in that space every now and then, but more so to use the outputs to validate the models, to adjust the models, etc. So do pretty much something of everything at 𝗙𝗏𝗃𝗪𝗏.
Quite interesting. So it sounds like you do cat bonds too.
Yeah, we do.
Cat bonds is what you were referring to earlier.
Yeah, we do a decent amount of cat bonds as well, but we don't have just cat bonds, for example. We actually much more on the reinsurance side than anything else. I think if there's an attractive cat bond out there, then we would consider picking it up. But yeah, definitely more on the reinsurance and retro side.
Interesting. Now, this episode, just to explain the genesis of this episode, as you mentioned, we met at Risk World, and me, just us in the course of a regular conversation, I was very curious about Bermuda, what that region was like. I think at the time you were in consulting, and at the time the podcast was fairly young, so I hadn't even gotten to the point where I thought of doing an episode on Bermuda. But this became very obvious later on that would be very valuable to the community, and I'd done a few other regional episodes. So I think this is a really nice full circle moment. And Bermuda is very significant from an insurance, reinsurance perspective. And the theme of today's episode is actuaries in Bermuda. I'm curious to know, how would you describe the insurance and risk management landscape in Bermuda?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Maybe I'll take a step back and just say, like, try to explain to people as well, like what Bermuda is, how big it is, and then I
Sure.
think that gives you a flavor for how significant the reinsurance space is. So,
And where it is, real quickly, where it is too, because sometimes I forget.
oh yeah, sure. So it's an island just off of the coast of North Carolina. So in the Atlantic, our time zone is Atlantic Daylight Time, so 1 hour ahead of New York, for example. Bermuda is a 2 hour flight from most cities on the East Coast, so about 2 hours to New York, Boston, Charlotte. Miami is a little bit longer, I believe. But and then London is about a 7 hour flight. So generally just off the coast of the East Coast. But yeah, Bermuda in terms of size, we're only about 65,000 residents. So very, very small. And even smaller is the land size. So total land area of Bermuda is about 21 square miles, not 2,100, just 21.
Wow.
Um, I mean, so yeah, it's crazy. It's extremely small. So I want you to take a guess how many insurance and reinsurance companies here are in Bermuda.
Well, I'm going to cheat
And
because
that
I
you
think
know
before
that's 65,000 people.
before you might have told me, I think it was 1,000 plus reinsurance companies.
Yeah, it's incredible, right? So I checked the other day, and I believe there's 1,500 regulated insurance entities. Now that's everything from life and P&C, etc., to brokers and agents and special purpose insurers, for example. But generally, the split is about I think there's about 800 registered non-life insurers or reinsurers that kind of fall into that bucket. And then there is about 200 life reinsurers and insurers. So, and then the remainder of that's really just brokers and agents, as I said, and special purpose insurers, etc. But yeah, I mean, Bermuda, given its size, I think, and not even just given its size, Bermuda is a significant reinsurance market. Bermuda, interestingly, is actually the largest provider of property cat reinsurance to the US market. So that's huge. We're massive in the ILS, or the insurance linked security space. That's where my company plays, for example. We have a big captive presence here as well, a captive insurance presence, and the life and annuity sector is definitely a growing sector as well, especially over the last couple of years. A lot of life reinsurers setting up on island. So definitely a massive reinsurance and insurance community. If you haven't learned about Bermuda in your studies, I hope this is helpful. Yeah, so I think a couple of points I'd like to add there is, people might ask, why Bermuda? Why don't you set up your company in the UK or in the States, for example? Like, why is Bermuda attractive, especially given how small it is, and things like that, and it's offshore and et cetera, et cetera. So I think the main benefit of Bermuda is the tax. So at the moment, there's zero corporate tax. That's gonna change, I believe, in 2025. I used to be a bit closer to this stuff when I was back at KPMG and doing consulting work. But I believe in 2025, global minimum tax is gonna come into play for entities who have multinational entities who have revenue of over 750 million euros, I think it is. And the percentage that's going to be applied to your annual revenue, I believe, is 15%. So, but that, again, that's something that's going to come into play in the future. And I'm sure the Bermuda government will find ways around that to, reduce duties or VAT, for example. There'll be other levers that they'll pull to still try and maintain, from a tax perspective as well, try and attract as many companies as possible. From a personal tax perspective, also very low. Personal tax is on a sliding scale. I believe it's about 0.5 to a maximum of 12.5%. and that varies on a sliding scale depending on how much you earn. I know some of the employers here do pay your tax portion for you as well, so that certainly helps. But yeah, other than that, Bermuda is generally a pretty expensive place. So yeah, one of the big things I'd say what makes Bermuda attractive is the tax. Secondly, I mean, definitely operational. I think Bermuda being in the strategic location that it is, 7-hour flight away from London and a 2-hour flight to most of the US cities, similar time zones as well. I think that definitely adds to the value of Bermuda as well. English is the first language or the main language in Bermuda. There's definitely a couple of Portuguese people or Portuguese speaking people here, but the majority of the people can speak English, and pretty much everyone in reinsurance speaks English. Currency wise, we have the Bermuda dollar. It's on par, or it's pegged to the US dollar, but you can use both interchangeably essentially. So you can pay with USD and you might get BMD in return, or you might pay BMD and get USD in return. So that's a nice thing to have as well. And then the workforce is definitely a massive benefit here as well. There's a lot of very qualified people, accountants, actuaries, lawyers, underwriters, risk professionals, you name it. And that just gives you a great pool of people to work with to set up a company, for the consulting companies to flourish, etc. So yeah, operationally, definitely Bermuda is a massive, has massive advantages. Tax, we have massive advantages. And then there's, multiple other stuff, which I'm sure we can get to in a bit more detail later on, because it's a whole topic by itself, but things like the capital and the regulatory regime and things like that.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask about is multinational companies. Of course, there's many multinationals there, and you talked about the global minimum tax. Just to get a sense of the profile of, I know there may not be one typical company, because you mentioned quite a bit of variation in terms of the types, even with just within the insurance spectrum who are there. And admittedly, my background is limited in terms of companies with varying structures, but from my limited understanding, at least in the US, I speak for the US, it's common for a larger company to have several different writing companies, and they may, use them for different geographies or different, types of business, lines of business. And that's how I envision it, multinational companies going into Bermuda. So would that be a fair assessment? Like when you think of a multinational company going to Bermuda, would it be, for instance, like maybe a larger company that's doing business, say, primarily in North America, but they create a reinsured subsidiary through which they do business in Bermuda, or even a larger reinsurer who, I don't know, how would you describe the company profile of?
Absolutely. I think, you spot on. I think from my understanding, multinational, is someone that you can have, insurance operations or reinsurance operations. And as long as it's in more than one country, I think that global minimum tax will come into play for you. So for example, if you're only in Bermuda, that might not be the case unless I'm not too sure on the, if it's an or and the 750 million, but definitely if you're under that 750 million annual revenue, you should be in a good position, I believe, from a tax perspective.
Yeah. So then one natural follow-up I have to that is that it feels like, and you said that, I think it was 800 PNC, a combination of insurance and reinsurance. Every time I think of Bermuda, I just think of reinsurance before I think of insurance. So why is it that it appears that there are more subsidiaries? And correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like proportionally there's more reinsurance than insurance. So why is there something within the laws that gives preference to reinsurance, or is it more for like a strategic business reason why companies tend to have reinsurance subsidiaries there?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think operationally it makes a bit more sense for reinsurance and retro guys to be based in Bermuda. I think thinking about insurance, a lot of your value add is being close to the customer, and I think the people that work in insurance, typically when you're working on the pricing side there, a key consideration is your distribution channel and your target market and your way to the market essentially. Whereas in Bermuda, if you're trying to target someone and trying to provide insurance coverage for someone in California or in Texas, I think it's going to be much more difficult. I think with today's online technology and AI and all that stuff, definitely I won't rule that out in the future, and there's definitely an opportunity for that. But definitely on the direct insurance side, one of your key value adds is your distribution channel and your closeness to your customer and being able to serve them. And yeah, I remember from the conference we met as well, a lot of the companies that were based there were construction companies and repair companies trying to partner with insurance companies to help them. Hey, if something happens, I'm here, I can assess your claims, I could go fix your roofs. Whereas in Bermuda, I think that's going to be something that might be quite difficult because just of the jurisdiction, and you're not as close to your customer. Whereas with the reinsurance, just like the data that reinsurance and retro companies get, as opposed to insurance company data, which is much more granular, you are a bit more separated from the customer, the initial customer at least, but also their data. So I think that's the main reason why it's probably a reinsurance and retro. So, and again, on a distribution channel side, insurance companies, as I mentioned, they use online applications, direct marketing, cold calling, work through MGAs, work through multiple different channels. Whereas on the reinsurance side, everything is very relationship and broker driven. So the London brokers will come down to Bermuda, the US brokers will come down to Bermuda. And yeah, we'll negotiate the deals over here.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Thanks for that clarification.
No,
it's hard to talk about insurance without talking about how the business of insurance itself is regulated in any given geography. So who's responsible for regulating insurance in Bermuda?
Yeah, good question. So I used to be pretty close to this type of stuff back at KPMG. You kind of become an expert in a lot of, or a jack of all trades, because the teams here in Bermuda are relatively small compared to elsewhere. So you typically get involved in a lot of different projects. But yeah, so then I work pretty closely with the regulator. The regulator in Bermuda is the Bermuda Monetary Authority, or the BMA. They're definitely a well-respected and credible and reputable regulator, especially for insurance business globally. But I wouldn't say just insurance business, really any financial services business. So yeah, they regulate the insurance companies over here. Bermuda is well respected. The Bermuda regulator, the BMA, is well respected amongst all the major regulators in the world, such as the PRA in the UK, for example. And I think in terms of regulation, Bermuda is definitely right up there in terms of global standards. So to use an example, I think it was in 2016 when Bermuda was granted Solvency II equivalence with the EU. And I think we're only one of two non-EU jurisdictions that have Solvency II equivalence. So the implications of that definitely on reinsurance business, is massive. It essentially allows us to freely, or Bermuda-based companies or groups, to freely, conduct business in the EU and not be subject to more onerous reporting requirements or capital requirements. But it also allows, and I think you briefly mentioned this earlier about, when we were talking about taxes, but a company having operations here and a company having operations elsewhere. Bermuda, what we've seen is often the groups are often based here. So, an insurance company or reinsurance company might have multiple different insurance or reinsurance entities globally, in the UK to service their clients over there, in the States to service their clients over here, but the group is often based in Bermuda. So Bermuda's group regulation is also very well regarded globally. And because of the Solvency II equivalence, a local entity in Italy, for example, or in France, that entity and the local regulator there can trust and have confidence in the capital and reporting requirements that the Bermuda regulator installs upon that group, and they can have comfort that the group is being regulated here, to a level that's similar to Solvency II. And for those of you that don't know or are more familiar with the States and the NAIC, Bermuda, I think it was back in 2019 or 2020, Bermuda received reciprocal status with the NAIC as well. So a similar story there is, a Bermuda-based company can do business in the States, it's not going to be a disadvantage for writing premiums or trying to obtain additional business. You could freely conduct business there, and you're not going to be subject to additional capital requirements or very onerous reporting. And I think that's just the ease of doing business. That's something that Bermuda, the regulator, and the way it's well respected and well regarded globally, that's one of the key benefits of having the regulator. Yeah, there's multiple other benefits, but I would say that's some of the key benefits.
That's definitely a good one. Regarding the Bermuda Monetary Authority, if I were to use a U.S. analogy, would you say it's comparable to the Federal Reserve?
Yes,
go ahead.
Correct, but the Federal Reserve, I believe would regulate the banks, whereas this will be the Bermuda Monetary Authority does regulate the banks as well. Yeah, I think that's probably a good comparison. But they do insurance too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and the reason I ask is because it just varies, obviously, country to country.
Correct.
Of course, in the U.S., you have the state-based regulation.
State level regulation is.
Yeah, but even if I think like an island like Jamaica, there's a Bank of Jamaica, there's the Financial Services Commission. So I think every country just has varying. But so I was just curious to know, just to kind of anchor myself in terms of how to think of it. No, you talked a little bit about solvency too, and I hope I'm not conflating things. I'm not as close to the accounting side, but when you think of the accounting and reporting standards in Bermuda, like, I guess if you're to answer simply, what accounting or reporting standards do they use there? Like,
so not too close to the accounting, probably similar to you. I think the as actuaries, we try to not be too involved in the accounting. I remember when I was in consulting, I tried not to do too many of the audits. I think the consulting projects were always more interesting, but naturally, I think, and that's one of the key thing or benefits of being an actuary, is you understand so many different workflows. You understand the accounting, you understand the underwriting, you understand the investor relations side of things, you understand multiple different things and process flows, and you can bring it all together. But yeah, in terms of the accounting standards, Bermuda, I believe you have the option of using IFRS or GAAP. Most companies use US GAAP, I believe. So that's long and short answer.
Yeah, let's leave it at that. I'm not a big fan of accounting.
Good stuff.
So we spoke about the abundance of insurance opportunities in Bermuda, and there's going to be many actuaries, of course, listening to this episode. So how do actuaries add value in insurance and risk management there?
Yeah, good question. So, I guess I'll start with consulting and in-house. So similar to, South Africa, UK, US, you have, a lot of actuaries working consulting, and those guys really do almost everything, from your typical capital reserving, pricing, to risk management, to, any helping new companies set up in Bermuda, etc. So you really get involved in a range of different things. Typically, in an insurance or reinsurance company in a bigger country, you'd be much more involved in like a siloed function, right? So you might have a reserving team, and you might be 5 guys in the reserving team. Everyone reports to the head of reserving reports to chief actuary, etc. That kind of structure. In Bermuda, it's definitely different, and I think that creates a lot of opportunity as well. Because, as I mentioned earlier, we have much smaller teams here. You get a lot of exposure to other areas. So if you are in-house, for example, you won't just be, in most instances, you won't just be working on reserving. You might be involved in pricing as well. And I think that's one of the really exciting bits of Bermuda, is being involved in pricing, being involved a bit more, of the front end of things, and seeing business being written, massive deals being done. I think as actuaries, sometimes people think of you as a second line or a bit more of a back office. You do the calculations and you build my models and stuff like that. But I think a lot of our actuaries like to present stuff as well, and like to showcase our models and things like that. So I think in Bermuda, you definitely do get that opportunity. You'll get that exposure much more so than elsewhere. So definitely a lot of I think, yeah, definitely a lot of different projects you can be working on. As I mentioned earlier, in terms of what I work on a bit of portfolio management. That's pulling everything together in the end, do a bit of underwriting, bit of reserving, bit of something, lots of different stuff. So there's a lot of opportunity for actuaries. And I think, you could make the world's your oyster. There's a lot of, you could stick into your silo and be a reserving actuary and still do an excellent job. But you can also go into the market and maybe become a broker or become an underwriter, stuff like that, where I don't think, in other jurisdictions, you necessarily have the opportunity to necessarily become that. So that's some of the things. There's definitely also, and that's the great thing about actuaries in Bermuda as well, is there's and insurance professionals, I should call it. So there's a actuarial like a community in Bermuda now. It's called 𝗘𝗽𝗪. And then there's also a Bermuda under 40s insurance and reinsurance group. So I'm sure there's a group for over 40s as well. So not discriminating against age in any way, but yeah, there's an under 40s group. We actually have an event on Thursday where I think it's just drinks and stuff like that, but they do night golf and things like that. And it's just a great way for you to add value, to meet other actuaries, to meet other insurance professionals. So yeah, I think, there's multiple ways you can get involved, not just on the work side, but also add value outside of work, knowing that there's so many professionals all around you. Like, I think in the States or in South Africa, where I'm from, most of my friends now know what an actuary is, but no one knew what it is. You walk in the streets and you speak to accountants, lawyers, doctors, etc. They, those are the role, and engineers. Those are the roles that you grow up being like, hey, that's what someone that's successful does. No one knew about the actuarial profession until a couple of years ago. So I think in Bermuda, every second person is an actuary. So it's great to go on the street and people actually know what you're doing. You might be on the same table as another actuary, and they might, you hopefully don't talk too much about work, but yeah, the community is just great, and reinsurance, insurance, but also professionals in general, but definitely also the actuaries. So
that is very unique for sure.
Absolutely.
Now, with opportunities come challenges. So what are some unique challenges for actuaries working in Bermuda?
I think probably one of the key challenges I'd say is, working on multiple different projects and having to understand that because of the smaller teams. I mean, Bermuda has a very high cost of living. It is very expensive. So that's probably one of the reasons as well why employers have typically smaller teams, try to outsource a lot of the work that doesn't need, like the non-business decision type work that doesn't need to be done on island. They'll do in the UK or in the States or elsewhere. So definitely the actuaries here need to be able to pull stuff together. So you need a good understanding of accounting. You need a good understanding of legal and contract wording and things like that. You need a good understanding of not only pricing, reserving in silos, but pricing, reserving, and capital, how they speak to each other, all those type of things. And even within sectors, I mean, I mentioned about the split between life and P&C, but there's composite reinsurers here as well, which means that you're both a life and a P&C carrier. So, and to be a chief actuary of that type of company, you need to understand life insurance business and annuity business. You also need to understand P&C business. So that's definitely a challenge for the actuaries here. Even though they are more, you're still a scarce profession, you're still well regarded, you're still well respected, you still have a very unique skill set. But you need to step up to the challenge and be able to pull things together, be able to summarize stuff. So yeah, that's definitely one of the key things. The other key challenge I'd probably say, most of the stuff's definitely similar to the States and the UK. One other thing I'd say is the insurance, reinsurance, or retro mix. I think a lot of actuaries, and growing up myself included, worked a bit more in insurance. You build models that the insurance companies use. You reserve for personal lines type business. I think especially in the sector where I am now, in reinsurance and property catastrophe, a lot of the fundamentals is still there, and you can use all of that, but there is definitely things that are different. Reinsurance reserving is different to primary reserving using traditional methods like triangles. If a catastrophe event happens, the nature of a catastrophe event is that it's very rare. You're not going to have all of that data like a motor insurance company in the States, for example. The distribution channels, which we touched on, that's fundamentally different. I mean, you're working with brokers. It's a relationship thing. It's more like, yes, adequately charging for risk, but also over time knowing and being there, like, speaking to brokers, speaking to clients, building up that relationship, helping them during their difficult times, but they also help you during your difficult times. When rates are low, for example, and you help them when there's a capacity shortage or they struggling to get cover. Whereas on the insurance side, I think, the distribution channels and those type of things, and even reserving pricing is fundamentally different. So that's definitely been a step up for me in terms of moving from that to understanding the reinsurance world and much less data and stuff like that.
Now, previously, when you talked about how the teams being smaller, that does give you an opportunity to expand your skill set. So I'm curious to know, based on your experience, like what is an example of an experience that you've acquired or gotten since moving to Bermuda that you might not have had otherwise had you not moved and been working in this environment? Are there any examples you can think of, whether that's it could be a project, an interaction, a client, or something just more unique to the region?
Work-wise, I mean, definitely I'd highlight catastrophe modeling. I think that's probably very few actuaries or very few people work in that. I don't think there's a specific, I know we were recruiting for catastrophe modeler the other day, and it's not like universities offer that type of degree. So it's often, people that study finance or investments, but even also actuaries that get involved in that space. So definitely that's been probably one of the key things that I've gotten to know over the years, understanding those models and how they work. And a great thing about that is as well is it brings together a lot of different professions. A catastrophe model is made up of engineers. The engineers. Well, let's start with the first thing.
Meteorology, yeah.
It's made up of those people. They tell you, okay, cool, it's this El Nino or La Nina or whatever. A storm is going to hit there, for example. Then the engineers will come in and say, hey, if the wind is coming at this speed, if it hits this house, this is what's the damage is going to be, for example. The actuaries will come in and say, hey, this is how that loss is gonna, this is the loss cost, and this is how it's gonna apply to my reinsurance structure. So it's really bringing a lot of different professions together and integrating all of that. I think that's why catastrophe modeling is something that's new to me and was very exciting.
Really good example and sounds very interesting. Now, given you mentioned the term retro a few times, and I'm excited to explore this a bit further. So given the significance of reinsurance to the region, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper on reinsurance specifically. What are the main types of structures, of reinsurance structures that risk professionals work on in Bermuda? Not necessarily limited to actuaries, but just in general.
So I'll try to focus, I think, on mostly what I do. I think so. What we do is, on the reinsurance side, I mean, I'd say it's pretty typical to probably most of the structures out there. There'll be one or two differences, which I'll get to, but yeah, the majority of stuff's traditional reinsurance. So where we provide indemnity cover to another insurance company based elsewhere. Then there's also retro. For those of you that don't know what retro is, that's reinsurance for reinsurance companies. So that's a big product or product type as well. You also have quota shares. That's pretty standard, I think, across most insurance or reinsurance industries. Another thing you mentioned earlier was cat bonds. So essentially, how those type of things work is similar to a bond. You purchase cover. If nothing happens after the redemption period, you get your money back. If something happens, the bond would pay out, and it might be a indemnity trigger or it might be an index-based trigger. There's multiple different ways in which you could structure a catastrophe bond. In terms of the emerging products, there's a couple of things. So index-linked products has definitely emerged over the last couple of years. So how that works is, you'll get an industry like, for example, PCS, which is owned by Verisk. They will release an industry loss estimate, and you might have a reinsurance contract that attaches at $50 billion and covers a stretch of 50 billion, above that, and you'll cover a percentage share of that. But so the payout is linked to an industry loss number, not necessarily your own, loss. So, for example, if I had my own insurance company, I incurred a massive loss due to a hurricane, that cover is not going to pay out for that. It's only going to pay out if the industry as a whole suffered a loss up to 50 billion, for example. So naturally, that introduces a lot of basis risk, but there's other benefits too, right? And people are trying to diversify into multiple different stuff, and I think it's good to diversify your portfolio by not just having indemnity covers. But yeah, parametric is definitely another field what people are exploring. So how that essentially works is it'll pay out based on something that's predefined, but it'll be based on something like wind speed for a hurricane, for example, or magnitude of earthquake for an earthquake, not necessarily, again, what your loss is. So you might suffer $100 loss, but your payout might be 10 million. Right. So it's all on, but typically people obviously try to structure the things like, hey, a hurricane needs to occur in this specific region, or needs to make landfall in this specific region, or the earthquake needs to happen in this perimeter, and then the payout will happen. So, but yeah, that naturally obviously does introduce some basis risk, but there's a couple other benefits to that as well. Like, it's not just basis risk. There's benefits as quickly, claims are settled pretty quickly. There's, as long as the triggers and things like that are pretty well defined, claims are settled pretty quickly, and there's very little legal disputes. I mean, I know if you look at traditional insurance companies that are buying indemnity cover, a lot of that, a big portion of the claim is often expenses or loss adjustment expenses, and that's really for for claim adjusters to go in to assess the claims. Is this really what people are saying this is, or should we be disputing this? And that includes legal costs as well. No, you fraud, or you not fraudulently, but you submitted a claim that you shouldn't have submitted, or this is not covered. You're trying to claim for flood, but it's covering only wind, etc. So parametric avoids, and index link doesn't, but parametric avoids all of those problems and payouts immediately as soon as that trigger. It's pretty straightforward. The wind speeds, that as long as the contract's pretty clear, it pays out. So yeah, I think that's definitely, especially in recent years with a couple of hurricanes occurring, I think that's definitely been a lot of people have tried to explore alternative ways to lower expenses, to settle claims quicker, and that's definitely a new and up and coming product.
Yeah, so let's circle back quickly just so people understand the term basis risk. If I understand what you said, is essentially a potential gap between the incurred losses for the company being insured, or and what the contract says, whether it's parametric or whether it's an industry number. It's there could be a gap there. So like you said, the company could incur 100 million, but if it's not triggered by the contract, then they wouldn't collect, and then vice versa. They could collect when they don't need to.
Correct. Yeah. So a simple example is if you look at an index linked product, it might be, you might have really, I mean, there was recently last weekend and in March as well, there was a lot of hailstorms and tornadoes in the States, for example. Now, obviously, those things are so localized. It may hit, but then again, it comes down to your own portfolio management. But it might hit, you might be insuring 10 houses in a row, and that tornado hits all 10 of those houses, but that's all that it hits. In that case, the industry loss is going to be very low. So, if you bought an industry loss cover, that the industry loss might actually be, say those houses are totally destroyed, all of them are, it's 10 houses, they're $1 million each. That's going to be $10 million. Your index linked product might only start paying out from, $1 billion up. So in that case, you're not going to recover anything. Whereas on the indemnity side or traditional reinsurance will be, you will purchase reinsurance cover based on your own incurred loss, right? So if you suffered that loss, those losses are then applied to your reinsurance structure or tower, and the payout is calculated accordingly. So yeah, I think traditional is, it definitely benefits people that manage their risks pretty well and ensure, appropriate diversification, etc. But yeah, that's where the basis risk comes in. You might have a big loss, but you might not receive anything. So it's a bit more difficult to manage your exposures and your accumulations and things like that. So that's why I'd say if you're doing something like that, people often do that together with a traditional indemnity cover. People won't typically go solo index-linked products, at least to my knowledge.
Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned is that people are having more of an appetite for some of those alternative risk transfer mechanisms. And you talked about, it might have been a previous conversation, that transition from ultimate net loss covers, which are the more traditional forms of reinsurance, treaty facultative, to the industry loss warrants and the parametric covers. Is that, you mentioned, of course, hurricane costs, cat costs, partially driving that, other than just the natural cycle of you having high cost within the market? Are there any other drivers of that? Would you say that's more of a cyclical thing?
Yeah, it's probably cyclical, but also, as I said, like definitely related to trying to settle claims quicker, trying to, not get too many people involved. I mean, I think, especially in Florida, where you've seen a lot of, where there's recently been some legislation changes. I think there's been, for example, in Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Michael, a big portion of the cost that was passed on to insurers was loss adjustment expenses, and legal costs and things like that, like lawyers going back and saying, hey, sir, you might have a claim, like you should go to the insurance company. And I think parametric and index-linked products try to overcome a lot of that by quickly settling claims. Hey, I'm paying out now. I'm not going to wait until it accumulates until my reinsurance tower. I'm paying out now. The reinsurer pays out straight away. So obviously on the reinsurance side, that complicates things as well, because typically reinsurance and retro providers will only receive claims, I don't know, a couple of months or even years in advance. It might eventually reach their tower as paid and incurred losses build up. Now you're having to pay out immediately. But yeah, I mean, I think there's benefits to both for sure.
Great. No, last but not least, to the fun part. It's given that there are many expats working in Bermuda, it's worth discussing what the culture is like in Bermuda. So how would you describe the culture outside of work in Bermuda?
Very laid back, in simple terms. No, I think, yeah, the culture is great. I mean, I'd say compared to, and I like to do this comparisons, compared to London and New York, for example, I think potentially California as well, or other big reinsurance or insurance hubs in the world. I think the work hours are definitely, and maybe I'm speaking for myself here, are definitely not as long as in some of those places. Your typical work day runs from 9 to 5. In the summer, it might even be a little bit shorter. During your busy times, for sure, yeah, you'll work a little bit harder. For the consultants, that's typically in February, March, April-ish, and for the reinsurance guys, that's in December, and then close to April again and close to June, July. So yeah, I think the work hours is definitely something that's great. Another thing to add to the laid back lifestyle is summer wear, or I don't know if you've heard of Bermuda shorts. So the guys, yeah, where you can wear shorts in the summer. Some companies require you to wear high socks as well, but some don't.
Oh yeah, I've seen that before in the Olympics, and usually in the opening ceremony.
Yeah, so it's like some companies do blazers with like a pretty bright tie shirt, and then Bermuda shorts are always most of the time relatively bright as well. So like a yellow, a pink, or blue, high socks, and formal shoes. So, but the reality of that is it's so hot in Bermuda over the summer months. It's so hot and humid, and really it's proper tropical and subtropical weather. So you need to wear something apart from winter clothes. Like in London, I think you can get away with that. In New York, you can get away with that. You have your 1 or 2 occasional days that it gets 80s Fahrenheit or 30s Celsius, and cool, you need to everyone's really hot on the subway. But in Bermuda, it's the whole summer is like that, and it's super humid. So yeah, that's probably one thing that's unique to Bermuda. And I've been, even in South Africa, I've gone to stores and they'll sell Bermuda shorts, call it Bermuda shorts. So that's quite nice. And then you can wear anything from a golf shirt to a formal shirt, for example. So yeah, work hours, clothing, outdoor activities. I mean, as I said to you earlier, I might go play a couple of holes after this. I think everything is, because it's such a small country. Obviously, there's a lot of other things like a high cost of living, housing, and cars and things like that. There's a very low supply of that. So that's a bit more difficult. You can't just go shopping whenever you want. It's not this massive mall or outlet store. But you can go play golf. You can go to the beach. You can go snorkeling. You can go diving. You can go play tennis. You can go. There's a lot of other great things about the outdoor life as well. So I think the lifestyle in Bermuda is definitely it's definitely great. And but because it's so small, people do travel a lot more than in other jurisdictions. I think I don't know what the average is, but probably once every quarter, once every 6 months, people travel overseas. And the East Coast is pretty close. The West Coast is a bit further, but people still, I mean, that doesn't stop people from traveling there. The EU is pretty close by. South Africa is very far, but I do encourage people to go there. But yeah, I think the lifestyle is pretty laid back. It's great. It's a great place to flourish outside of work as well. So I'll definitely encourage people to make a trip here, and hopefully don't come just for your honeymoon or just for things like that. It's an expensive place, but come check it out. And if there's a lot of opportunities in Bermuda for sure. So if any recruiters or other people haven't gotten in touch with you, I'm sure if people are interested in Bermuda, I know a bit more about Bermuda now and from our previous conversations, and so do I. So I'm happy to help people, and help people get in touch.
That's a great note to end on, and really appreciate you spending the time here today, Wes. It's a very enjoyable conversation and also insightful conversation. And I'm looking forward to sharing it with the community. Like you said, I think many people will be able to use this to help navigate as they consider opportunities in Bermuda. It'll be very helpful.
Absolutely. Well, no, thanks for your time and thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.